Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We'll start our program for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, both in person, and we have quite a few participants online as well at this conference titled Language Futures in South Asia. My name is Uma Pradhan. I'm a lecturer at University College London, and I'm co-convening this conference with Mohini Gupta, who is a doctoral candidate here at University of Oxford. And this event is being organized by Education South Asia Initiative with support from India Oxford Initiative, INDOX, and Oxford India Center for Sustainable Development. Before we start, just a very quick housekeeping announcements. The toilets are downstairs, and there is no fire drill that has been scheduled. So if there is any kind of fire or fire alarm, we'll need to follow the event manager to leave the building. It can get quite warm here, so we'll try to keep the windows open, but do feel free to leave the room for fresh air if needed, especially during the break. There are some water bottles there for us on the table as well. We will be taking photographs throughout the day today, which will be used in preparation of our report and also in social media posts. So please do let us know if you do not want to be included in the photograph, and we'll take that into consideration. We'll also be live streaming this event, and at the moment we are live streaming this event in YouTube page, where it will remain after the conference as well. So if any of the presenters would like their presentation to be not recorded or live streamed, please do let us know, and we'll as soon as possible so that we can make those arrangements as well. So as I mentioned, this conference is being organized by Education South Asia Initiative, which is a collaborative platform for discussions around various issues related to education and South Asia. And we organized our first conference in 2021. And the conference was an online conference with several parallel sessions with more than 100 presentations, which were presented either live or submitted as recorded presentations. And select papers from that conference are now published in a form of an edited volume, and you'll find some flyers from the book on the table there. It is called Rethinking Education in the Post-Pandemic Context of South Asia. We're very pleased that we have a new website, and I'd like to invite Mohini to just take us through the website that we have, and we'd like to launch that website today here in this conference.
Thank you, Uma, and thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Like Uma said, we organized our first conference in 2021 that was fully virtual. So this is our first sort of in-person hybrid conference. We're really excited to have you all here. I'm going to just show you the new website that we have. We're going to treat this as a launch of our website. So this is educationsouthAsia.com. You'll find a lot of information here. There's details about us. There's some blog pieces that we have from students, practitioners, researchers, independent researchers, academics from all around the world. A lot of them are here who've written pieces for us as well. So you'll find a lot of think pieces on this page. Under events, you'll see details about our earlier conference, our conference now. We run a reading group on language and education. We run a seminar series where we host academics or practitioners, again, who are working on South Asia. And then we have some resources like photo essays, documentary, conversations with people in the field. And there's a link to contact us. And if you go down from the website, you can also join our mailing list. So please do have a look at the website whenever you get a chance, educationsouthAsia.com, and feel free to send us any feedback or any thoughts that you have on the website. So we just wanted to share that with you. And what I'll do now is, like Uma said, we're organizing this conference in collaboration with INDOX, which is the India Oxford Initiative, and the Oxford India Center for Sustainable Development. Extremely grateful for your support. Thank you so much. We want to invite Vinita Govindraj from Oxford India Center for Sustainable Development to say a few words about the center, and then we'll begin the conference. Thank you, Mohini, and thank you, Uma. It's so wonderful to see this conference come together so well over the past few months, thanks to all of your efforts. The Oxford India Center for Sustainable Development is so glad to be part of this conference and to support it, particularly because of how well the themes of this conference have been crafted and the novel and interdisciplinary nature of this event. So a little bit about the center itself. It is based in Somerville College. It celebrates 10 years this year, and it supports broad multidisciplinary view of sustainable development through its research, its scholarships, and its hub activities, and one of them being the collaboration on this event. And in this way, this conference fits so well into the center's work by providing a gateway into the relevance and importance of language education to sustainable development worldwide. We know that sustainable development encompasses a wide range of issues like poverty eradication, gender equality, climate action, but actually to address these challenges is essential to ensure that ideas, knowledge, and information are effectively transmitted and understood by individuals and communities worldwide. And of course, language serves as a medium through which these concepts and experiences are shared. It empowers individuals to voice their concerns and participate in decision-making processes to advocate for sustainable practices at the local, national, and global levels. And so by recognizing the relevance of language, we can work towards a more inclusive form of sustainable development that's also culturally diverse. So once again, thank you all for coming and a very warm welcome from the Oxford India Center.
Thank you very much, Vinita. We really appreciate your support. Today's the theme of the conference today is language futures in South Asia. And language remains a matter of social, political, and economic concern, especially in the context of region like South Asia. Be the question of appointing national language or drafting a language policy, or about the status of dialects and unrecognized mother tongues, or marginalization of different indigenous, tribal, or minority languages. The issue of language continues to pose a challenge in South Asia. And we've been discussing these issues throughout this Trinity term in Language and Education Reading Group, which met every 2 weeks to discuss different readings on language and education, and which was organized and coordinated very skillfully by Abhishek Datta and Mohini Gupta. And the reading group has now put together a very extensive bibliography, a reading list on language and education in South Asia, which will also be available on this website. And today we'll be continuing these conversations throughout the day. The day is structured in 4 panels on the theme of, we'll start with the theme of language and technology, and then the second panel is on English language and education. Our third panel is titled Language and Caste in India. And then the final panel is on language and politics. And each of these panels will have 4 paper presentations. Each paper has been allocated 15 minutes to present for the presentations, and after which the chair will briefly comment on the set of papers, and the final 30 minutes will be allocated for Q&A session. The conference is hybrid, and there will be virtual presenters as well as the attendees. So we request all the online attendees to add their comments and questions on the chat box, and we'll take them together after the presentation. All right, so without further delay, let's start with our first panel. Now, our first panel is on the theme of language and technology, and Professor J.N. Keir has kindly agreed to chair this panel. Professor Keir is Professor of Korean Linguistics at the University of Oxford. She's a linguist, pragmatist, and Asian specialist who researches the future of human language in the context of social media behaviors, big data, and AI linguistics. Her work includes publications in pragmatic particles, emoji language, and syntax in AI age with a focus on Asian perspective. Thank you so much, Professor Keir, for your support, and I would now like to hand it over to you to start the panel.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this very, very interesting, exciting conference. And so we're going to, this session would be themed on language and technology. And I think it's also a very much challenging area because as we see today, there's always to do things virtually, but in a way, hybrid virtual way. It's very challenging. Every conference I've been, yesterday I was in another conference and it's another different technical issue, but in a way, same technical issues and so on. So, but then I think this is kind of the future that we cannot resist. So, yeah, I hope you will enjoy and be able to engage with this very much new reality, new topic that we have to live with now. So the first talk today, the session is by Samir Abraham Thomas, and Samir is an independent researcher based in New Delhi and taught courses in academic writing and literature and the arts at Calcutta University. He also writes on the fine arts in India and has an MPhil in English literature from Delhi University. So he's going to talk about his title is My Phone Won't Teach Me Malayalam, South Asian Languages and Language Acquisition Apps. So he will tell us about his experience with app language learning. How should I?
So he's going to present virtually. Samir, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Am I audible?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, great. Sure. Thank you so much, Professor, for that introduction. My paper is titled "My Phone Won't Teach Me Malayalam: South Asian Languages and Language Acquisition Apps." I have a presentation. Am I able to share screen here?
Sorry, yes, you should be able to do that.
Okay, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Is it working
okay, now, yeah. I am able to share. Is my screen visible?
It's working, yeah.
Is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, just 1 second. Right. So, yeah. So my paper's titled "My Phone Won't Teach Me Malayalam: South Asian Languages and Language Acquisition Apps." Duolingo is a massively popular language learning app offering courses in 39 languages for English speakers. These include European languages like Spanish, German, French, and Italian, Asian languages like Japanese and Korean, and even a number of constructed languages like Klingon from Star Trek and High Valyrian from George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. Noticeably underrepresented are languages originating in the Indian subcontinent, with the sole exception of Hindi. There are actually more constructed languages than there are South Asian languages. And I'll use South Asian, Indian subcontinent a little interchangeably, but for the most part, the Indian subcontinent. As a longtime user of Duolingo, I wondered why this lacuna exists. Plenty of research has been done on the efficacy of language learning apps, but no research seems to have been done regarding the language politics of such apps. In this paper, I hope to draw some attention to such questions and offer some tentative answers. I arrived at these answers by examining the learning data and reports produced by Duolingo itself to draw inferences that might explain the underrepresentation of languages originating in the Indian subcontinent. In this, Duolingo is typical of the larger ecosystem of language acquisition apps, where I find a similar underrepresentation, with the exception of apps produced by Indian developers. But first, I want to share my personal experience of using these language learning apps and the challenges and desires I have as an Anglophone Malayali seeking digital solutions to his alienation from his so-called mother tongue, Malayalam. I say that Malayalam is my so-called mother tongue because I never learned how to speak or read it. I was born and raised in New Delhi, far from Kerala, which is the South Indian state that my father and maternal grandparents come from. My knowledge of the language extends to certain very basic questions my Malayalam speaking relatives would ask whenever they would meet me during summer vacations in Kerala. What is your name? Have you eaten? Which class are you in? Which later became, are you in college? What are you studying? And then, do you have a job and are you married? Also, throughout, he doesn't speak Malayalam. Even when it comes to those questions, I can only recognize them based on vaguely identifying the same sounds. I can't conjugate the verbs involved, and if asked to repeat back the question, I would either fail or mangle the pronunciation. This inability to converse in the language my extended family is most comfortable with often leaves me feeling alienated when around them. At best, I'm bored when meeting family with whom I cannot converse. At worst, I feel like a black sheep, disconnected from my roots, unable to engage with people I love for the affection and hospitality they've shown, but whom I can never really know in the way that conversation in a shared language might allow. Over the past few years, this has made me want to learn Malayalam. Past attempts to learn the language as a child proved ineffective. My parents claimed that I was resistant to the language, by which they meant that I didn't pick it up organically. I attribute this to the fact that my parents conversed in English for the most part and Hindi when communicating with people in Delhi, like the maid, the plumber, our neighbors and friends. They only spoke Malayalam when talking to relatives or to each other when they didn't want me and my brother to understand what they were saying. As far as I know, no concerted effort was made to teach me Malayalam other than an aborted attempt by my grandfather who lived in Kerala and would only stay with us during the winter. I remember once expressing an interest for learning and convincing my parents to buy me an alphabet book intended for small children, like the one shown here, in which the different letters of the Malayalam alphabet were set next to images of animals, people, and objects that began with the same letter. I hadn't considered the fact that to read it, I would need to already know how to read the script or know the words for the various reference in Malayalam. It was not an ideal learning resource for someone who doesn't know the language, who tended not to care about his cultural heritage, and whose working parents didn't have the free time to read out an alphabet book to their otherwise literate son. The only other experience I had was my grandfather endeavoring to teach me a couple of words. This happened for about a week when I was in school irregularly, 1 or 2 words at a time. My parents made him stop because they thought he was trying to teach me how to swear in Malayalam. They told me one of the words he taught me meant elephant dung. Personally, I think that he was trying to teach me the word for elephant, but my terrible pronunciation gave my parents the wrong impression. Either way, that was the end of my grandfather's lessons. I share all this in order to paint a picture of one kind of subject who might turn to language learning apps and the social and historical circumstances within which such a desire is created. My search stemmed from the confluence of a number of factors that I can only gesture at here. In short, they would include the religious, caste, and class identities of my parents, the nuclear family structure within which I was raised, the diverse cultural composition of the subcontinent along state lines, the cultural capital that comes with English proficiency in India, and the pragmatic and financial dimension of 2 academic historians raising children in New Delhi. All of this might give the impression that I had no interest in learning any language other than English. This is not the case. I've been using Duolingo to learn Spanish and Swedish for a few years, and more recently, Japanese. Duolingo gamifies the learning process using features like leaderboards, experience points, and achievements, all drawn from video games. Convenient, free, and fun, it's lowered the bar for entry into language acquisition, making the process seem much less intimidating and more engaging. It allows me to get a taste of different languages, hear them sounded out, and in the case of Japanese, even learn how to read and write non-Latin scripts. Other digital language tools like Google Translate and Reverso have made it such that many of Duolingo's blind spots can fairly easily be filled in. Duolingo also has forums to discuss questions and occasionally organizes meetups where app users can come together to converse in the language they're learning. I managed to attend one of these meetups for Spanish learners in Delhi. While I wouldn't say I've acquired fluency in any of the languages I've learned, I certainly have enough familiarity with each of them to be able to identify them, translate simple passages, and carry out rudimentary halting conversation, which is more than I can say for my knowledge of Malayalam. My success and fondness for Duolingo led me to turn to gamified app-based learning to reconnect with my heritage, only to find a dead end, at least as far as Duolingo is concerned. I considered some possible explanations for why Duolingo does not offer courses in Indian languages. I've listed them here. I'll take them up one by one and briefly outline my findings. So first, let's consider the possibility that linguistic diversity isn't one of Duolingo's concerns when designing content. One explanation might be that Duolingo has no interest in representing a diversity of languages and is content with offering courses in Anglo-European languages like English, French, Spanish, and so on. However, this doesn't really hold water, as Duolingo does offer courses in East Asian languages like Chinese and Vietnamese, one Native American language, namely Navajo. And as per their website, it's in the process of developing a course on Xhosa, and they already have a course on Swahili. The official Duolingo blog even has posts celebrating the diversity of Asian languages, by which they mostly mean East Asian, and boasting of the internal diversity of the organization. I'm quoting here from this post called Diversity at Duolingo. To develop a product that meets the diverse needs of our learners, the teams within Duolingo must reflect the diversity of those learners. Of the 175 or so people who work at Duolingo, our employees represent 25 different countries and speak over 15 languages fluently, but we know we need to continue to press forward to increase the types of diversity represented at the company. To what extent this internal diversity includes individuals from the subcontinent is something that I'll touch on later. Before that, let's consider the second possibility, that Indian languages aren't spoken as widely as others. It's possible that Duolingo decides what language courses they should include based on how useful their users might find them. Or in other words, the more widely spoken a language is, the more likely it is that a user might benefit from learning the language on Duolingo. Once again, it's unlikely that this is a major reason why Indian languages are underrepresented. To cite just one example, Tamil is spoken by over 86 million people worldwide as of 2011. Welsh, by contrast, has a little over 573,000 speakers. Duolingo offers a Welsh course, but not a Tamil course. Similarly, here, this is a list of the most spoken languages in the world. In this list, of the languages on this list, the only ones that you can't learn on Duolingo are Bengali and Lehenda, both of which are languages originating in the Indian subcontinent. Now let's consider instead that Indian languages are too difficult to teach. After all, it's possible that some languages aren't suited to being taught via language learning apps. Language difficulty is highly variable depending on which languages are being compared, and hence this can be difficult to evaluate. However, we do know that Duolingo has a Japanese course, which with its 3 scripts and variable context-specific kanji readings and tonal pronunciations is by no means an easy language to learn. Duolingo has also shared the challenges they faced in designing and promoting their English course for Hindi speakers. But they were not only able to publish that course, they also published a Hindi course for English learners, overcoming the linguistic pedagogical challenges that involved. Oddly enough, they also have an English course for Bengali speakers, but not a Bengali course for English speakers. Whatever the reason for that may be, it can be safely assumed that it isn't because of any fundamental pedagogical incompatibility between the two languages. What if there aren't as many human resources for Indian languages at Duolingo? While at one time Duolingo crowdsourced the development of their courses via their incubator program, referred to here as their volunteer contributor program, this was discontinued once they started making money and wished to standardize their approach to designing courses. The incubator was instrumental in creating the Hawaiian and Irish courses, among others. So it's possible that once it was ended, the process of publishing courses was slowed down by the lack of people capable of designing Indian language courses. While Duolingo has expressed its commitment to diversity, as mentioned earlier, it's always possible that the specific composition of their team lacks subcontinental representation. That said, as of 2019, Duolingo not only doubled the size of its team, but also hired 70% people of color. One might assume that this would include people of Indian descent, but I haven't found any specifics here. It's possible that Indian language courses are being developed, but just aren't ready yet. After all, in 2018, when Duolingo released its Hindi for English speakers course, it was reported that English courses for Bengali, Punjabi, Tamil, and Telugu learners were in the works. However, as of 2023, only the courses for Hindi and Bengali speakers have materialized. This might be because of delays created by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the closure of the incubator program, which I mentioned earlier. The incubator program was linked to the development of these courses in the statement that they made. However, there's no readily available information regarding the status of these courses or Indian language courses for English speakers. The incubator page used to show the progress level of the various courses being developed. You can see here, they mentioned incubation phase 1, phase 2, and you could see what was being prepared. However, now in the absence of the incubator program, you just have the list of languages on the site. And there we only know that the COSA course is 6% complete. Other than that, no other language courses are listed as being in development. Finally, let's consider the possibility that there's simply less demand for English languages. From an economic perspective, this would seem unlikely. Let's only consider the question of migrant labor. Even if we are to only consider migration occurring within the country, it's clear that enough Indians are traveling for work to states with languages unfamiliar to them for there to be a significant demand for assistance in learning these languages. Simply taking Malayalam as an example, migrant labor is crucial enough to Kerala's economy that accessible Malayalam learning resources could realistically be assumed to meet a consumer need. Lakhs of migrant laborers, many of them from faraway and linguistically alien states like Jharkhand, Bihar, Assam, and West Bengal, work in Kerala, offsetting the significant out-migration of native Malayalis from the state. Duolingo is cognizant also of the mobile data revolution in India, as a result of which 500 million Indians came online for the first time between 2017 and 2022. Furthermore, Hindi is the 10th most popular course in Duolingo as of 2022. Yet India is the only country in which it's the second most popular course, and there's no country in which Hindi is the most popular course. All of this suggests that there's potentially huge demand in the subcontinent alone, let alone internationally. It's unclear if Duolingo is factoring this in at all. In a blog post regarding Duolingo's activities for Indian users, which I mentioned here, language learning for the next billion, only the English for Hindi speakers course was touched upon. This is probably a consequence of India's colonial hangover and the troubling equation of English proficiency with intelligence and employability that exists in the country. So there's a lot more focus on learning English than other languages. While the demand for Indian language courses may be high in terms of raw numbers, the most convincing explanation for their absence has to do more with the popularity and visibility of particular languages on a global stage as a result of political and cultural events and trends. The massive popularity of the HBO series Game of Thrones is no doubt the reason why Duolingo has a high Valyrian course. The Ukraine war led to a spike in popularity of the Ukrainian course in 2022, especially in countries taking in Ukrainian refugees. The popularity of Duolingo's Korean course is strongly linked to the rising popularity of Korean culture internationally, thanks to K-pop and the series Squid Game, among other factors, and other K-dramas. This is a graph that Duolingo released showing a spike in the people interested in learning Korean around September 2020, which is when Squid Game was released. The increasing popularity of Korean culture has also resulted in more people traveling to South Korea for tourism, which Duolingo predicts will increase in 2023. So this could also lead to Duolingo deciding to prioritize that course, since more people would want to learn the language if they're traveling in that country. So what are some conclusions we can arrive at? While there might be a number of explanations for the absence of Indian languages on Duolingo, available data indicates that the most plausible one has to do with international demand as shaped by cultural popularity. Perhaps then that the international success of the Telugu film RRR will inspire Duolingo to prioritize creating and publishing a Telugu course. While this remains to be seen, it's worth noting that Duolingo is not alone in its lack of attention to Indian languages. A similar trend can be observed in the other major language learning platforms such as Rosetta Stone, Memrise, and Babbel. I've listed some of them here. Flashcards for learning languages like Tamil, Telugu, and Malayalam are available on apps like DuoCards, which is not related to Duolingo, and Tiny Cards, which is developed by Duolingo, but it was discontinued in 2020 to redirect funds to the Duolingo app. These flashcard systems, though, are nowhere near as popular or quality controlled as apps like Duolingo. Anyone can just make a deck and upload it. Furthermore, I could point out that many of these platforms are paid. The great thing about Duolingo is it has a freemium model, so you can pay for additional perks, but it's essentially free for users. The one exception to this pattern is Mondly. Mondly has courses in Hindi and also Bengali, but that's it. That's as far as it goes. In the future, I wish to explore the landscape of homegrown Indian language learning apps like Speak Malayalam 360 and Learn Malayalam from English. I hope people here who are listening to this are similarly inspired to do that. so that if nothing else, Malayali black sheep like myself are able to find the resources they need. My phone won't teach me Malayalam, but maybe I haven't been looking hard enough, and maybe one day I won't have to. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very, very interesting talk. But because of time, maybe we should move on. So next speaker is, I think we are not virtual, but we are going to have her here. So next speaker is Minha Khan, and she's graduate student in Oxford University, and she is a sociologist of education with a particular focus on opportunity, equity, and constraints in education systems. She works at the intersection of research, policy, and design to promote equitable access to education. And her research has previously explored how schooling in a child's non-native language can make learning inaccessible, how household and gender norms complicate accessing higher education for female students, and the impact of funding and governance on the success of schools. Currently, she is a graduate student in social policy at the University of Oxford and has an undergraduate degree in sociology and education from Stanford University. Minha, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Minha. I was supposed to co-present this with Harleen. I just want to give her a shout out before we start. But unfortunately, she is still on a plane. It got delayed, and so she's not able to be here with us today. That said, this program is really, yes. Oh, so sorry. Yes. So this project was really both of our brainchild, and I will hopefully get into it today. The topic is language, learning language and cross-cultural connection. And the findings from the study were created from a digital ethnography that was created during a virtual education program for multilingual high school students across South Asia. Great. So this education program actually was constructed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of the global disruption caused to learning, about 600 million children were impacted across South Asia. Impacted is a broad word. It varied across, across different countries, across different populations, but a lot of kids were struggling. And what we realized is there was a particular demographic that was struggling quite tangibly, which was students who were just about to apply to colleges. Because they were in the process, they had worked really hard to get to that point, and all of a sudden they realized we don't actually know how to decide who we want to be, what we want to do, what we want to study. Their networks of fellow peers, those were broken. They didn't have teachers that they could access to the same way that they were able to before. And so really that gap between high school and college became really scary. And so because of that, we developed the South Asian Winter Camp, which was a short virtual free education and mentorship program for about 360 high school students from 5 different South Asian countries. And South Asia, as many of you already know, is a highly multilingual region, due to which we had about 29 different languages amongst the student population. And so to be able to understand how these students experienced this program, but also in particular, whether it was beneficial to them, we performed an evaluative digital ethnography that included surveys, classroom observations, and interviews. And one really incredible finding that we found was that the role and dynamics of language in this multicultural regional classroom, and again, because of the different politics within the region, we hadn't actually seen a classroom like this ever before. And so what this study will look into is the role of language in learning and cross-cultural connection between students, their peers, mentors, and teachers. And the argument that we actually ended up making was that it's not enough to just adopt a local language in the classroom. If you really want to address language hierarchies, there needs to be something more meaningful. And this was a really shocking finding for me because I've been for the last about 5 years of my life looking into how do we adopt local languages into classrooms, how do we teach children in languages they understand, and all of that remained incredibly valid. Those are very important considerations. But when you look at the region of South Asia, the amount of diversity, linguistic included, it's not enough to just say teach students in their own languages, because the risk of that is language segregation. You are putting students into boxes by what languages they speak, and all of that opportunity of cross-cultural connection and learning from one another is lost. And so the first finding that we actually had was the exercise of student agency in deciding what languages they use. And so we had decided that English was the only language that all of them spoke to a certain level. And so the classes themselves were hosted in English, but students didn't have to communicate in English if they didn't want to. If they had a particular question to ask and they knew that their teacher knew that language, they could speak in their own languages. They could speak with their friends in languages they wanted to. They could speak with their peers in languages they felt comfortable in. And so really it was up to them to be able to see language as a tool and then decide which tool do I want to use to achieve this certain outcome. And so there was a lot of conversation from the students about, I really like that I don't have to speak any language. I can speak whatever I like, whenever I like it. And for example, they might feel more comfortable solving a math problem in English, but then to be able to have a mentorship session in their local language because they feel like they can express themselves more. And we had no guidelines around that. They could do whatever they needed to do. The second was that the students felt that they were in a very safe and familiar space. And this is again very shocking to me because 29 different languages, hugely diverse classroom. But because it was framed as all of us are coming from different backgrounds, but in the same space and able to learn from one another, they felt that they were able to express that. And so one huge example was that they loved that they had the same accent. And obviously they didn't, right? They're from different countries, they're from different languages. But what they meant was that we like that we can have non-Western accents and still communicate. And they talked about how, for example, when they watch a YouTube video, they always feel kind of stupid because the YouTuber always has this English accent that they can never mimic. But in this classroom, even though we're speaking in English, English isn't framed as this glorified language and instead as a tool. And if you have a different accent while you speak English, nobody cares because we all have different accents. And so it became a very safe and familiar space for them. What this led to was the encouragement of one, multilingualism, but two, and I think in some ways more importantly, conversations around diversity, culture, identity. So I remember, coming into a classroom, a virtual one, of course, and people are talking about, oh, what time does the electricity go in your house? And when it goes, what do you call it? And there were different words for that. And, having conversations about, yes, we're all different, but how fun that we can have these conversations about shared experiences using different languages. And they often ended up having very kind of mixed language conversations where even though they would drop in a word from their own local languages, there was kind of this shared understanding of context, understanding of experiences that led them to be able to have conversations that they wouldn't have been able to had we had put them in their language groups, had we only taught them in languages that they were most fluent in. And so this became a classroom of a lot of conversation around identity and culture. And I think, most importantly for me, it became an environment of learning without fear because they weren't worried that somebody was going to make fun of them for not speaking English properly, which meant that they could ask questions. And so even though the classroom was in English, they weren't scared to ask because they knew that their peers were in very similar spaces to them where English is no one's first language, but we're using it because it's the only language that's available, and that's fine. English wasn't glorified, it wasn't put on top of the language hierarchy. Instead just seen as a tool that they could use if they wanted to, and it became an environment where they talked about, even though in their own classrooms they often have learned in languages that are more fluent to them, they still felt scared to ask questions. But in this environment, even without the familiarity of language, they still could ask without any fear. And so the conclusion we came to from all of this was that for the purpose of ease of cross-cultural conversation and learning, English can continue to be used as a common language while also ensuring that there's no assertion of the superiority of English over other languages. And what this means is that we need to reframe the language debate from good languages and bad languages, from better languages and worse languages, to what language is most appropriate now, what opportunities does it present now, and what constraints does it present? We didn't choose English because it was the best language. We chose it because it was the only language we had in our repertoire. That doesn't mean that it's going to be the only language forever, but absolutely doesn't mean that we should be putting students into boxes of languages they understand at the cost of cross-cultural learning. And so there are a few different takeaways from this that I would love to be able to share with you. First, language hierarchies must be actively dismantled in the classroom, that we need to be able to address this idea of a good language and a bad language very actively. These conversations need to happen regardless of what the mode of instruction is with the classroom. And efforts need to be made to ensure no language segregation of students occurs. We cannot be putting students into language boxes and hoping that they stay there. Instead, helping them grow into different spheres as well in their life. Language should be framed as a tool, a mode of communication, of connection, and of learning. And finally, language is a set of opportunities and a set of constraints. Every classroom will have its opportunities and have its constraints. We need to be able to identify those and then decide what is most appropriate for any given classroom. And so I hope if there's just one thing you take away from this is that we need to broaden the conversation around language of education and reframe the language debate. I hope that we can start looking at languages as opportunities and constraints and try to start talking about how we have glorified some languages and devalued others, and hopefully create classrooms where students feel safe, where they feel that they can ask questions and where they can communicate with one another. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Mina, for a very, very interesting presentation. And I'm sure we have time to come back to the debates and the topics that you have just presented. So now we have Adriana Bashar, and Adriana is a graduate student at University of Oxford, and she's a Ukrainian graduate student at Somerville College. And she's also a sanctuary scholar with a background in sociology. She's currently pursuing an MSc in digital and social change in education. Her passion for South Asian education was sparked during her years of teaching and conducting research in Bangladesh, where she explored ways to improve educational access and inclusivity. Adriana's academic achievements have been recognized through her nomination for the Woman Leader of Tomorrow Award by her university. She has collaborated with renowned organizations such as Save the Children and UNICEF, further enriching her expertise in the field. Her research focuses on leveraging technology to enhance accessibility and inclusivity in education by investigating innovative approaches. Adriana aims to bridge educational gap and gaps to ensure equitable learning opportunities for all. It's fascinating, and she's going to talk us today. She will talk us about navigating pedagogical implications of digital education in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. So before I begin my presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of a backstory of how this all emerged. So I ended up in Bangladesh, and I ended up pursuing my university degree in Bangladesh. And during that time, I was privileged enough to have
a number of on-field experiences of doing research, starting from Rohingya refugees to different tribal communities. And during this time, I've started to ask myself a lot of questions, questions that were centered around why were certain communities not able to do schooling in their own language. So that was a thing that I was researching at the time. I presented my work in conferences there in Bangladesh, but eventually when I started teaching, I began to notice that even as a student and as an educator, there were different lackings that I was noticing. And primarily that lacking started with pedagogical training and lack thereof. And particularly, even in physical education, be that secondary education or tertiary education, there was a significant lack of regulation of pedagogical training. So somebody who had adequate, for example, university education could go in and without a teaching certificate or specific teacher training could just go and teach at a school. And that resulted in a number of problems. And that is how kind of like my initial observation started. At that time, it was not a project that I was working on. And this is an entirely kind of a solo project. It's not like a part of anything. I'm out of pure curiosity of my own. And I started just looking into, asking these questions. Why are there these lackings? What is happening? And how can they be improved? But then when COVID hit, that's when real issues started to come about. And particularly teachers and educators have begun having significant problems in implementing educational technologies in the teaching process. And there was no pedagogical backing about that. So initially, the scenario of digital kind of goal in Bangladesh was that in 2018, it was proposed by the Prime Minister that they're going to have a transformation of the entire Bangladesh economic, educational spheres into a digital Bangladesh. And that kind of had in mind that after a number of years, they're going to implement technologies into a number of areas. And that meant that obviously high investment into technology, high investment into collaborations with international firms. And that in a way, over a period of time, Bangladesh has done an incredible job at improving their educational landscape with digital implications. However, the lacking in terms of pedagogy still remained, and effectiveness of integration was really kind of like shaky. So yeah, and some initial kind of steps were the moving things that I started reading about. And again, there's no paper or kind of like extensive literature that has been done on this particular topic. So it was really hard to look into like different data and just try to figure out how to go about it. So initially, the first thing that I started with is observations of like the narratives that were shared in newspapers, media, etc. And obviously the observations of educational institutions. And many educators would lack training in digital technology in the classroom, and they simply would not know even like, let alone implement some interesting edtech tools. But that would also mean that they would have trouble like navigating Zoom, navigating Teams, etc. They would not know how to use specific tools that would really help certain children. So for example, if somebody needed adaptive learning, somebody who had a specific disability in the classroom would really have a difficulty in having that online class, because their teacher would not know what if they could be using some kind of new technology to assist that person. And that was specifically exacerbated during online sessions. And I was also teaching during COVID. And I saw a lot of my colleagues just completely kind of have this little epiphany where we would kind of start talking in teachers' meetings about implementation of plagiarism checkers, implementation of different tools like even Kahoot. I mean, I think everyone at least has heard of Kahoot, and these things were completely absent in these classrooms. And the school that I was teaching at was an international school. But when I looked into students from English medium, Bengali medium schools, that was absolutely absent. Yeah. So as you can see, only 17% of teachers in Bangladesh have received any training to use ICT. And even these numbers are kind of like, you never know what's there, because in rural areas, things are a lot more complicated. So I came into this with three main research questions, and I would say that this is a work in progress, because I will continue kind of going about and exploring this further and further, because I realized that this is a lot more complicated than I thought, and I guess that I want to keep on looking into how we can provide significant solutions to these problems. So the first questions were, what are the current opportunities and challenges of integrating technology in education of Bangladesh? So some of which that I've pointed out right now. How can digital education be implemented in a pedagogically informed manner? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And what factors influence the effectiveness of digital education in Bangladesh? Okay, so I've spoken briefly about some of these. I'm not going to repeat too much, but the picture I hope is already kind of like started to be built around. So whether I looked into primarily university and secondary education, however, a lot of the kind of initial even explorative studies that were happening were in literature offered data from primary education. But when we think about pedagogy and pedagogical implications in digital education, I was thinking more about like trying to use it for bridging gaps of access, and looking into just how we can accommodate specific capabilities, specific learning, and all that. But that was not being done on an extensive level, if at all. And so most of the kind of like the most recent, I suppose, data that was used, and kind of like tools that were used, at least initiated, were mostly done is like in a very expensive IB schools, and less so in simple English medium. Another problem, a clear one, is that somebody who does not have connectivity is not able to be as happy and like graduate as the person on the other side. And this is a problem that kind of is probably one of the first three dominate in terms of like, how do we get about it? Connectivity is simply not there in some rural regions, let alone like when we just kind of step down from pedagogical implications and ed tech and all of that. Just access to internet is a problem in on itself. And so people who do not have good access to or proper connectivity, they're already unable to, already suffering from some kind of access gap. What are we going to, how are they going to be tackled, right? So that brings me to the challenges in integrating technology, which was addressing limited access to technology and inadequate teacher training, working collaboratively to address challenges, and designing and implementing programs that are culturally and linguistically suitable. What do I mean by designing and implementing programs that are culturally and linguistically suitable? It means that when we look into, as the presenters before me have so nicely explained, the South Asian region is extremely specific in terms of language. And for Bangladesh, for those of you, I'm sure that you know, it's a country that fought for language in the liberation war. And for them to be able to kind of feel like they have to constantly speaking the language of colonizers, is a way to just keep on that kind of hierarchy going. And I feel like one of the really good approaches would be to start implementing into digital technologies the availability of different languages for people who want to do so. How would this be, I guess, more broadly looked into the context of South Asia? And I wanted to kind of I wanted to give a small example here. India is now known to be one of the edtech leaders in the world. And for those of you who know, Bijus is one of the leading edtech companies, who has done a tremendous job at kind of opening accessibility to some students. But what we're kind of noticing as a particular trend that has been happening in certain Asian regions, South Asia, Bangladesh as well, is that when investment happens for edtech, and when there begins to be an implementation of technology, it is treated more like a business rather than a educational kind of pursuit. And so the entire thing becomes very complicated because people are more interested in the amount of profit that they make, the kind of students they kind of attract, but the pedagogical side of it is not as important anymore. And so they kind of like, okay, you have a degree from this fancy, nice university, you're good to go. But if that person might not be suitable for like a really good, sensitive approach to teaching kids, and I guess, again, I keep on repeating this, teaching kids with specific needs, for which technology right now is very, very important, is just not there. And so I think that concrete steps must be taken in regulating this implementation, not just in Bangladesh, but really in all the kind of South Asian region countries that are kind of like not looking at this very carefully enough. So kind of shifting the perspective a little bit from like a business focused model to a little bit more of a pedagogical informed model. And look into these problems from like the learner, educator, and then maybe possibly digital problems. Yeah, so I wanted to provide an example of how we can go about it. And an example would be an amazing initiative that's a nonprofit that's here in the UK called GIC SCC. And what they do is they have created a digital toolkit, and they help educational institutions, stakeholders, policymakers come together, do research, and also move towards creating a technologically informed educational systems. So this is, they work with all kind of, all the stakeholders, all the players, and this bringing them together makes this an entirely collaborative approach. And it's really doing amazing work in terms of like providing opportunities. But this is something that I think that's Bangladesh, we could start from Bangladesh, but I think that a lot of countries who are looking for a pedagogically informed approach would really benefit from something like that, just creating a digital toolkit, starting to create a platform where researchers, policymakers, educators can all collaborate and start working to improve new ideas. This is another example that's happening in one of the areas in Rajshahi in Bangladesh. So for those who, obviously we're not gonna go into like the whole laptop for a child fiasco, but at least I think that some solutions such as just putting a screen and offering very interactive sessions to children. My professor here at Oxford, Rebecca Ainan, who researches a lot in like teens and access to education, she offered, in her study for UK, she said that even those children who do not have access to smartphones can perhaps use radio for initial education kind of access, and that is too technology. So I think that when we talk about like digital technology, we think, okay,
it has to be super high tech, it should be super like high end, but really it starts really small. And I think getting there and starting something, but again, having people who are very well trained and informed to provide quality education to these children is really going to start making small steps into improving. And so I would like to just conclude with a couple of things that I feel that technology has its, I guess, challenges, particularly in developing countries. There's a lot of that elements of inequality, exacerbating access problems, etc. But it does have potential to do good things. It has a potential to be used in a good manner, and potentially also to help fix certain things that are a problem. And I suppose that doing something like the examples that I have given before, just putting together a collaborative approach and a pedagogical informed approach, we could really start to go forward in having good pedagogical implications. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much for a really important talk. It's actually really true that, we have technology that's so much developing fast, but then, as we all see, that it's not distributed equally, and there's a great divide, somehow digital divide within India, where you said that probably the high tech, most advanced technological has technology. So I think we can kind of wrap up and continue to discuss this matter. But we also have final speaker, Uma Pradhan, and she is lecturer UCL Institute of Education, and she faculties of Education and Society and a research associate at the University of Oxford. Uma's research explores cultural and material dimensions of language education, especially in relation to technology, inequality, and diversity.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I must start with a caveat that this is a very preliminary analysis of an ongoing research, and we had some last-minute cancellations that we are trying to fill in for those cancellations as well. So in this paper titled "Remembering Language: Reviving Nepal Bhasa Through Artificial Intelligence Translations," I'll discuss how language-based artificial intelligence is being utilized to imagine new futures for minoritized languages. And this presentation focuses on Nepal Bhasa Google Translate project coordinated by a Newa community in diaspora who have been working together to generate this Nepal Bhasa language database for Google Translate. At the presentation, I'll try to trace the processes and challenges encountered by these non-mainstream languages during the development of this technology. And I'll try to highlight two dimensions of remembering language. Firstly, by recalling the language to train Google Translate software, and secondly, by revitalizing this language through AI translations. This is the time to dream, to imagine, to build, so that we can do what we cannot even imagine today. This was what President of World Newa Organization said when he was inviting Newa diasporic community to contribute to this Google Translate project. This project was launched around 2018-19 in collaboration with Google and the World Newa Organization, a membership-based organization of diasporic Newa communities around the world, and has been mobilizing people in and outside of Nepal to contribute to Google Translate. And as a result, it has led to this extensive and ongoing collaborative efforts both within and outside of Nepal. A group of volunteers from Newar community gather at least once a week on Zoom to construct this linguistic data by either translating sentences or by validating these translated sentences. And each sentences need to be validated at least 10 times to be accepted as proper translation. And they recently completed the 500th episode, which was streamed live during their daily broadcast. So just a bit of context, Nepal Bhasa is a language spoken by Newar, one of the ethnic groups in Nepal. Although Nepal Bhasa actually technically means the language of Nepal, it is distinct from Nepali, which is the official language of Nepal. And the term Nepal Bhasa is deliberately chosen by Newar ethnic activists who argue that this term more accurately represents the historical nature of this language. And this term is now widely accepted in formal settings and is used by Nepali state as a census category as well. And minoritized languages such as Nepal Bhasa have endured a violent history, with many of their language activists being imprisoned for publishing poetry and other literature. And prior to the Constitution of 1990, the use of language other than national language Nepali in public spaces and for official purposes was deemed communal, and therefore it was against the law. And as a result, the transmission of this language to the younger generation has encountered numerous obstacles. And the Google Translate project, therefore, is built on this rich history of efforts to revive and revitalize Nepal Bhasa. And this includes establishment of various FM radio stations, magazines, television programs, dictionaries, and schools. And the schools were my previous focus of my previous research. And it is within this very specific social and historical context that communities' desire and determination to work on this project has emerged. His call that I mentioned earlier, his call to action, to dream, to imagine, and to build this new world was therefore rooted in this possibility of envisioning a new future, one that is distinct from the current reality, where indigenous and minority languages are vanishing at an alarming rate, and in which UNESCO has declared Nepal Bhasa as a definitely endangered language, that it is going to disappear in few years, in few generations at least. So this vision was seen as being attainable with this active presencing of language within these technological spaces. And while the potential for this automation and this logic of world building that is there within this AI present these new avenues for language development, envisioning new language future also was about recognizing language hierarchies that often overshadow these technological advancements. So the underlying power hierarchies often manifest in different ways. For example, it could manifest in terms of insufficient language data, limited language recognition, absence of standardization, inadequate pedagogical tools, and incompatibility with these foundational models of machine learning. So it's really trying to really understand this entanglement between material aspects of language as well as the ideological aspects. So unlike mainstream and high resource language, minoritized languages require more fundamental tasks, such as creating these data sets and standardizing the language. So firstly, in absence of this reliable records and substantial language corpus, what community members were doing was they were heavily relying on discussion and deliberation to come up with these translated texts and to train Google Translate. And the task of envisioning this technological future for these languages involved very significant task of also translating these efforts to bridge these diverse logic and knowledge systems of indigenous language and indigenous grammar and understanding, but also AI and how AI can understand language and making them accessible to each other. And each of these Zoom rooms is composed of 3 to 6 individuals with diverse interests coming together in a very loosely articulated goal of reviving this language, this interest to reviving this language, and many of them in their 50s or above. The members of these Zoom room engaged in discussions about most effective way to translate these sentences. They often translated sentences aloud, experimented with multiple versions, often relied on memory and embodied knowledge of the language. And nobody dictated how exactly to work in these spaces, how the work was to be done. So each group worked quite differently. And consequently, it led to discussions and debates on determining the optimal translation. And many chose to skip sentences that were difficult. And when they completed the translation, they often prioritized meanings rather than word-to-word translation. And in the process, also teaching the machine to understand word, grammar, meaning, and analysis. And there were quite a lot of difficulties, for example, in these to translate word like articles, which doesn't have like multiple meanings and multiple ways in which each sentence could be translated. Over the past 2 years, community members worldwide have actively participated on Zoom, volunteering their time and contributing approximately 50 translations per day, in addition to numerous validations. And according to the community's own report, 31,000 translations have been completed thus far. So this process of language remembering was also being developed with this very specific social political context and with a very particular objective. Like in this case, it was facilitated through this artificial intelligence, and in the context where teaching and passing down of this knowledge to younger generation has proven to be very challenging. And so thus, by establishing this kind of corpus and coding, this AI-based technology was perceived as a way to bring both people and machine together, unlocking this potentially new world where language would not be lost. This particular language would not be lost. And this technological space provided an avenue for constructing the form, the content, and the functionalities of this repository. And it was envisioned to serve as an interface between this collective act of remembering through this AI memory and to reuse and reclaim the language. And the main objective of this project was seen to construct this language repository, specifically designed for this new speakers of Nepal Bhasa, particularly the younger generation who may need to learn their own mother tongue, who may need to learn their own native language and as a second language. And the members often spoke of its purpose as preserving a way of life. And they often talked about how there was this imagined potential future where they imagined that their child will be able to use Google Translate to write a Father's Day card in Nepal Bhasa. They will be able to create robots that can convey health messages in the local language. They will be able to communicate with their grandparents. So considering these kind of unequal foundations that has led to this language loss, as seen here, the process of envisioning the future of these minoritized language fundamentally involved also this task of reimagining and reshaping this power dynamics between different languages. And just to conclude very quickly, the death of the language and this entire project was really trying to intervene within this idea of stopping this death of the language. And death of the language is when nobody speaks that language anymore, or this disembodiment of the language, and then there's no person speaking that language. And sure, they were also trying to really save this language, even when it is disembodied, giving it a life through the integration within this AI. And this actually really also shows this how these, say, working with minoritized language is not just a very technical endeavor, but also this process of really challenging language hierarchies through active presencing of these languages. And especially by bringing together these very disparate, different worlds, seemingly different worlds, one representing indigenous and minoritized language, which is often associated with the past, and the other representing artificial intelligence, regarded as a realm of these kind of futuristic possibilities. And here, by bringing these together in a very practical and very experiential and relational way, here future making was being seen as a continuous process of ongoing action, where interventions in the present could be done. You could reframe the past, but also in the formulation of particular different kind of future visions. And through these technologies, we're trying to envisage different possibility of the time yet to come. And what I've tried to do here is also to bring together and acknowledge the interplay between technology, language education, and the broader social and political factors that influence both issues. Thank you.
We can all. So Samia is going to be. Yeah. So we have probably about 10 minutes that we can discuss, but also we love to hear from you. Is it okay? Really, thank you so much for all of your really interesting talk. I think this is one of my best conference this year. It's really learned so much, and I think it's kind of we're all entering into this very much super digital age where it's digital is not our option, but it's kind of we have to do it in a way as we've done conference today virtually in a way that makes sense to everyone digital using digital asset. But I also in the digital could. Is it too? Digital could bring, so much potential. For example, like as Uma said, that we are witnessing every day the language death and how also language how minoritized language in a way suffer. But somehow, like with the help of AI, maybe we can, at least to preserve the language and be able to give the language community that they need, and maybe AI being more accessible right now, be able to do a great thing for us, potential and future. But then, of course, I think, and also another sort of the positive aspect of AI or even VR is that, as Mina said, somehow in the digital space, it could bring some kind of equity or like more, in terms of like students, the way how they engage in English, they can feel more safe and may feel more less anxious. We love to meet together like this in person, but sometimes we know that in human interaction you can feel more anxious. But in digital, I mean, nobody, for example, like talking with the chatbot, feel anxious at all. So I think there's some great potential, and it's great to have Samir there back in this room, but then maybe he's a little bit sort of disadvantaged because he's there, we are here, but then if we are in some kind of virtual space together, like VR space, maybe we can be more in an equal situation, but then we also lose out human interaction that we so much love. But, so digital technology can bring so much potential that we can do so many things. It can make our dream come true. But at the same time, we know the danger, which is that, another name of capitalism in digital world, that those who have more, enjoy, but then as we heard from Adriana that the people in Bangladesh, only 17% sorry, that was a teacher. Yes. So actually, the accessible, it's not everybody can access these great resources, and also the connectivity, those who are connected to have internet resources, fast internet, but then of course we know that there are people who don't have, have problems in accessing internet. And then, what does it mean to us? So it's a space of possibility and future, but also the space that would make things quite, it brings sort of another level of inequality. But at the same time, we haven't discussed today this part, but there's also unknown danger in, the AI world, in the VR. If you are in a VR headset, it's kind of solo space. You don't know what your kids are doing with the VR set. So in a way, we are entering into very unknown world, but really hoping that this technology and the space may turn out as more positive rather than negative. And particularly listening to your talk, that for many sort of in a way the under-resourced language, and in a way and same with what Samia told us, that app technology is developing very fast, but we also know that not only Duolingo, but in many cases that is only for very celebrated European languages, and the rest a little bit less represented, as we all know, not only app digital world, but in textbook and teaching and every sector we are engaged in. So there's great injustice there. So which also we are hoping to tackle and overcome. So this is as far as I can get, but I think all of us, you have kind of shown us the possibility, but at the same time, the problems, possible danger or the possible inequality, and perhaps digital education should really break this barrier and make it more the asset to be available for more pupils with diverse, population, and in a way making digital asset to be the asset for diversity, cultural, linguistic diversity, rather than inequality. I think that's our aim together. So I'm sorry for speaking too much. I was so enthusiastic. I mean, I really enjoyed your talk. So, but would you like to comment a little bit more on each other's talk, and then, or do you have any question?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a historian. I work on South Asia and also many other regions in reference to decolonization. But I mean, when we talk of South Asia, generally the focus is on religious diversity, what we in South Asian context call communalism. But I was just wondering, I mean, I know the emphasis on languages and technology. What about the scripts? Because scripts could be, what Samir was saying, that Indian languages or South languages are not there. When we talk about the globalization or global impact, or, as sort of medium of communication, even amongst the South Asians in diaspora, is it largely to do with diaspora? I mean, with the dialects. For example, I know Punjabi has 4 scripts. In Pakistan, it is Shahmukhi. In Indian Punjab, it is Gurmukhi. And then it becomes in Haryana, Devanagari. And in diaspora, more and more Punjabis are using Romanized Punjabi. So it's a kind of tradition which was called Hindustani, during the Second World War and First World War, when the Indian soldiers were all over, and to communicate with one another and to communicate with their officers and to communicate back home, they would use the mother tongue, but they would use the English, sort of alphabet. So we see this divide. I don't know whether this plurality is a positive thing, or maybe it is restraining the development of these languages, because we generally talk about Hindi, Urdu divide, though they're very similar. when we speak, but when we write, they're two different languages. Same with languages of Indus Valley have Arabic script, but the languages of UP and further Bengal have non-Arabic script. And when we look at what Samir was talking about, Kerala, there is a divide between northern subcontinent, including Nepal and Bhutan, and southern subcontinent. When we talk about Dravidian languages, Tamil and all that. So what I'm saying is that where does the script, pose us a problem or even a prospect so that we could see these languages coming up and competing with languages like Arabic or, similar other languages? Thank you.
I think that's really excellent question, really interesting. Would you like to comment on?
Samir might be able to
Samir?
comment a bit more on that, and then we get
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that, actually. I thought particularly what you said about Punjabi and having the 4 different scripts, that does present a particular challenge which would be difficult to address, but I would say that difficulty has to do with how willing a language learning app might have, how willing they might be to actually create variants of a course. So if, for example, you were to start with, and as someone from the Indian subcontinent, I'm biased, but Gurmukhi, if you were to start with Gurmukhi and were to have a Punjabi language course in Gurmukhi, that would still be a beginning. And I can imagine them then progressing beyond to gradually add these other elements. I mentioned briefly Japanese as something that they do teach. And Japanese has a very complex writing system where you actually have to learn 3 scripts, katakana, hiragana, and kanji if you want to communicate with some degree of fluency. And even there, within kanji, it's unless you're a native speaker, it can be very difficult to be able to pass the very minor differences between, okay, this particular kanji is pronounced in this way, there's an onyomi or kunyomi based on the context, and it can mean either this or that, and you have to have that degree of familiarity to be able to get it. But when learning it on Duolingo, they will still throw it in there. They will put in the kanji interspersed with hiragana and katakana. And recently they have introduced a entirely separate module, which does not exist in at least Spanish and Swedish, which is where you can practice the script. And they go to the extent of even having stroke order being a point of reference. And to be able to do that, and again, which is fairly easy to do on a touch screen, since you have that degree of accessibility that you wouldn't say if you were learning on a desktop or any other kind of device. Having touch as an input then can make learning the different scripts a little easier. So I don't necessarily think there is in principle a challenge there, but I do agree that in cases like this, it is saying where a single language can have so many scripts, and it's not necessarily the case that one speaker would have mastery over all the scripts or be expected to have that kind of mastery. In situations like that, I think definitely it requires a degree of commitment and funding that perhaps something like a Duolingo might not do, but perhaps initiatives that are coming more from the ground up, like Uma was talking about, where the people themselves are generating these kinds of resources, and then that's contributing to a larger pedagogical tool. That I believe could definitely be a step in that direction. I hope that answers your question in some way.
I would like to also comment. Yeah, please.
The issue of script is actually one of the manifestations. The way I see it is manifestation of this language hierarchy that we have, right? So a lot of language that that are minoritized may not, the script may not be recognized by this technology, and that is the issue of language hierarchy that is already existing in the technology that we have. And in the case of Nepal Bhasa, there are, again, as you mentioned, quite a few scripts. And what they have chosen to do is to go with the Devanagari script, because that is the script that is now recognized, already recognized by the software, and the module recognizes it already. So, the choice, I think, and that I see in the schools that are teaching different languages as well, the choice these minoritized languages are making is to choose these languages which is already recognized by the system, and then trying to include that language in that in that script. And in that process, yes, in these technological spaces, certain scripts are not available anymore. And creating that space for that new text is going to take again this kind of time and effort. And all this time and effort that I'm talking about is voluntary time and effort that people are putting in. It's not funded by anybody. So there is this extra burden onto these minoritized languages to even save the language and even to save. And in that process, I've seen that certain compromises are being made, and that's like one of the compromises has been on the script. There are, I think, at least 10, 12 different scripts in Nepal Bhasha as well, which is not being used anymore, especially in the technological space.
I would like to just add a couple of things here. I guess I think in our lectures we always talk about like the balance of educational technologies and technologies in general, and a lot of people just seeing this as a panacea, a fix for all, and other people arguing that indeed it's holding back a lot of these very, very important aspects, especially when it comes to like language, cultural inclusiveness, and etc. And I think that is very important. I was very interested by your question because I think my dissertation is going to be on like decolonizing global knowledge, and I think that these are some of the aspects that I am constantly in debate with, and these are constantly the questions that I ask. My perfect, probably kind of the way that I know about technology now and the way that I can visualize it, I would probably think that if we could find a way to digitize probably the scripts and then kind of move it to a level where we can all have access to it, and then create like a platform where this is manageable and then people can actually have access. This is a multiple step process because it means that, for example, when you take somebody who speaks a specific language and it's not very popular, they need to have the proficiency of the language, but also be able to accommodate, ed tech technologies to make sure that this can be properly digitized, the scripts can be respectfully used and put into like online platforms. So that is my kind of like ideal, the way that I would see it. I would really love that to be seen because I've constantly looked into the way that these underrepresented communities are just like their languages are being erased. And even as somebody who studies technology and tends to be quite optimistic sometimes, I do have these concerns that what will happen otherwise if we just kind of ignore it. So yeah.
I'm a little conscious of the time, so I wondered if maybe the people on the chat wanted to have the chance to answer the question, or if there's anyone else in the room. Yeah. Okay. So just to begin with a comment, so I work at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Obviously everyone's dealing with AI at the moment, and we've realized this year that many of our students are writing essays in languages other than in English, and then translating them whole scale using translation software. And it's forced the university to take a position on language use. And the university's position currently is that this is an English language university and the use of translation software such as this is not allowed. But anyway, from a teacher's perspective, it's been very interesting for me to see the ways in which different tools are democratizing the classroom in different ways and unraveling some language hierarchies. So, for example, many students are using closed captioning and translation live while I'm teaching. So I'm really interested, along with you, Uma, and the second speaker, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, in the ways in which we can sort of break down some of these language hierarchies. And I see a lot of potential in AI for doing that. But I wondered if you, Uma, and the second speaker might want to comment on the other ways in which new hierarchies in terms of language use are emerging in these contexts. And I'm not thinking here just in terms of access to technologies, but I just feel like there must be some new ways in which new hierarchies are kind of being practiced and emerging. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I think with the use of AI in classrooms, this is going to be a very long conversation that we're going to have for many years. So I think it's hard to, give one singular stance as things keep changing. What I have seen though is that the same group of students, about the 360 students that we did have in the program, they have been using software such as ChatGPT in ways to be able to participate in opportunities both locally and abroad. And I think that it's really been essential in helping them seize the opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And that includes, for example, writing a brief essay, putting it in ChatGPT and saying, can you help me fix my grammar? And I see why that would be a concern for universities, but it's also a huge opportunity for students who otherwise just would not engage. They refuse to engage. And it was actually incredible because a lot of the students who weren't even applying abroad initially are now thinking of applying abroad. Some of them are getting in, and it's like they wouldn't have been where they are unless they had tools to be able to help them get there. The cost, of course, is that they are relying on these tools, but at the same time, they're creating learning opportunities. The only thing that was keeping them away from being able to get into certain universities was, for example, grammar. And I think it depends at that point, what is the end goal? If the end goal is to get students into places of learning and using language as a tool, then I think, AI is doing a great job. That said, every day something new comes up. I don't want to, oversimplify the situation either.
I agree with Mina. It is creating different kind of opportunities as well for people, and also kind of filling that gap that different people might have otherwise. In this project, the new hierarchies, you asked for new hierarchies, and one of the things that I could think of would be the standardization. When the moment languages are standardized, it's standardized in a particular way, and particular form of language is then fed into the system. Which means that different ways in which language, the oral tradition, the speaking language would have different kind of forms and different dialects and different ways of expressing the same thing. That is getting standardized, and that's one of the very clear, as like I can see it happening, because only a particular way of saying that word sentence can be fed into. They are trying to teach styles, but then that's taking time as well. So that is like definitely one of the new hierarchies. People who are experts are people who already know this language, and those people in the Zoom room are of a particular background. Not everybody on the street is there on the Zoom room feeding their version of the language. So that's definitely new kinds of hierarchies getting fed into that system.
Yeah.
Hi, so there's a clarification for Samir. I'll read out first for Samir, and then there are two questions for Uma. For Samir, can it be that the high level of acquaintance with English does not make learning Malayalam and other major Indian languages as much as imperative as learning an East Asian language? Furthermore, do the northern workers use Hindi in their local communication? Is literacy and especially IT literacy among them low? Would there be any further motivations beyond identity and intellectual pursuit to learn Malayalam? That's a question for Samir. This is from Dr. Imre Banga from the University of Oxford. And then there are two questions for Uma. Lack of shared script is similar to the lack of standardization. Not only Punjabi has multiple scripts. This is a similar problem for Konkani, which has 4 scripts, or Santal, which has 5 scripts. This is when communal interests conflict. How was the script maintained when Nepal Bhasa was not officially recognized? Was there a standard script? Because Modi lost out for Devanagari in Marathi in Maharashtra because the script was not standardized. And the second question is, how do you manage between communal markers or social X within the language, still in the process of standardization? Because Google Translate as well as spell checks will have strong impact on standardization. So these are two questions for Uma. Samir, thanks.
So if I could work through those questions backwards a little bit. First of all, would there be further motivations beyond identity and intellectual pursuit? I think one of the major things that's become popular of late is there's a growing awareness in India and in North India of South Indian cinema. This is Telugu cinema, Tamil cinema, Malayalam cinema. There's an increasing popularity to the extent to which there is an interest that's growing among North Indian people to learn the language to be able to better appreciate these films. And this is something that's been in the background to a certain extent. In fact, there was a wave about maybe in the last decade of Hindi Bollywood films adapting South Indian films as Hindi language films. Singham is a great example of that. But now it's really shifting where the original language films are more often being dubbed rather than adapted. Bahubali is a great example. This is a Telugu film from S.S. Rajamouli, which became hugely popular in North India. And so that has generated a large interest of people wanting to engage with Malayalam, engage with Tamil for these sort of cultural entertainment reasons. So I think that's definitely a motivation that's beyond simply identity and intellectual pursuit. In terms of Northern workers using Hindi in their local communications, this will vary to some extent. It's important here to remember that South India, although we often talk about South India as a sort of monolith, there's a huge variation from state to state. To take Tamil Nadu particularly as an example, Hindi is looked upon with a great deal of suspicion in Tamil Nadu. The main reason for this is in Tamil Nadu, you have a strong Tamil identitarian movement that has pushed back on attempts to impose Hindi as a national language. India does not actually have a national language. There's multiple official languages, but there's this sense of fear of Hindi being of this kind of hierarchy being created in Hindi displacing Tamil and undermining Tamil identity. That is a real fear that exists there. That isn't so much the case in Kerala. In Kerala, you will find people who will speak Hindi to a certain extent. The idea of some broken Hindi is something that you'll access. On the other hand, if you look at Andhra Pradesh, where I was teaching for a while, very difficult to find people who speak Hindi, much more familiar with Telugu, unless they are having regular communication with people from North India. So these things will vary from place to place. But in terms of Northern workers using Hindi in local communication, as a rule, it isn't very reliable, right? It's not the common. There's, again, thanks to hierarchy, thanks to the penetration of Bollywood and Hindi cinema, they have more chance if they understand Hindi. But if they are, say, people who speak Odia, or they speak people who speak Maithili, they would find it even more challenging, because you won't find any kind of familiarity with those languages simply because that kind of cultural penetration hasn't happened. So they might use Hindi for communication amongst themselves, but it's not really reliable for local communication beyond a point. For your first question regarding the high level of acquaintance with English does not make learning Malayalam as much an imperative as learning an Eastern Asian language. I'm not entirely sure when you say high level of acquaintance, who you're talking about, as in who would have this high level of acquaintance. But if you're talking about, say, people in Kerala itself, Kerala does have a higher than average literacy rate in India. And there it is true that that includes English literacy to some extent, but it certainly isn't as widespread to serve as a lingua franca. I know, for example, of course, there's this famous Chinua Achebe point about how English serves in many cases a lingua franca for a number of different African communities. It doesn't quite operate the same way among Indian states, except on an official and educational level. On a day-to-day level, Hindi is more common, but again, as I said, there's this kind of resistance to that might pose a challenge to that. And certainly there isn't as much pressure, more pressure to say learn Mandarin there is to learn English in the subcontinent. And the final thing you mentioned is the question of literacy. I think that's definitely very important. Literacy isn't something that's very widespread necessarily among migrant workers, but that is changing. I think digital literacy in particular is something that's on the rise of late. More and more people from various class backgrounds are able to access the internet thanks to easily available mobile internet. So you're finding, for example, the person who's selling vegetables on the street will have a mobile phone, will have a smartphone, and will be able to operate it with a certain degree of ease. So I think that is definitely changing and is becoming less and less a barrier of entry when it comes to using these kind of language learning apps. I hope that addresses the various things you asked.
Thank you so much. It's really great.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll just very short answer to the very complicated question of scripts. In Nepal Bhasa, there are, I think, 11, 12 different scripts. Those scripts are being used in various forms in print media and by publishing various magazines and newspapers. And that itself is a huge project because maintaining that script is not an easy task. There have been a lot of creative work where people are holding these workshops on script. They will keep a stall in a fair where they will write people's name in the script, and they will encourage people to, because it's a very artistic script, so you can actually have a calligraphy. So people are doing calligraphy on those scripts. So there are different ways in which people are trying to work with the script, but that has been quite a difficult task, especially one of the script is registered as Nepal's script with the UN, so that gives some kind of status, but most of the scripts are not used anymore in Nepal Bhasa. So I'll just stop there because it's a big topic, the topic of script.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to close the session, and thank you for coming and joining us. Thank you so much for speakers.
Thank you so much.
We have a short tea break now. Should we extend it by 5 minutes? We have a short tea break now. You'll get some tea and coffee in seminar room 1. If you just go downstairs past the reception, you'll find seminar room 1. Let's come back in the next 5 to 7 minutes. We'll begin the next session by 11:50. So yeah, please feel free to go out and come back.